Welcome to the Right to Reason podcast. I am your host, Robert Stanley. What is in the mind of a flat earther? What makes someone think the way they do, and how do we crack that code? Psychologist Dr. Mathew Hunsinger will be talking to a Right to Reason favorite, Tyler Klatenoff. We're going to begin by arguing the curvature of the Earth and whether or not space exists. And then we're going to dig into the motivations behind the psychology of a real conspiracy theorist. Are you ready?
It's the Right to Reason podcast.
And also, if we lived on a ball, we would see buildings would tilt away from you if you see them in the distance. You know, we're told that the Earth curves, there's 8 inches per mile of exponential curve to this ball. So even after a couple miles, we should start to see a measurable amount of curve. And we should be able to measure that and verify it. But we can't do anything like that.
In terms of the buildings curving away from us, I mean, the thing is when you, like, for example, if the two of you were standing, let's say a foot apart from each other.
Wait. Matthew, I'm sorry, man. Tyler, are you saying that we should be able to see buildings, like, not standing straight up, but, like, in the distance they would start to, like, turn away?
Tilt away from us, yeah.
Really?
And this model that we have predicts very well everything that we observe. And so, and the flat Earth model does a relatively poor job of predicting what we
I disagree
observe.
with that. I think they just took the flat model and pretty much just wrapped it around the ball. And they're pretty much interchangeable.
Instead of me saying...
But you are vulnerable. You all got swindled by religion.
Yes.
What's to me?
Yes. Would you say that maybe...
So we are vulnerable. We obviously do believe untrue things, we are told, and we should maybe look at everything all over again. If we're going to be believing in religion, maybe outer space is fake, just like heaven and hell.
Do you think they hurt you and you said, I'm not going to get hurt again?
I mean...
This episode of the Right to Reason podcast is brought to you by our patrons and contributors like me. We have all recognized the value of the unrestrained marketplace of ideas and have decided to make a difference. You can make a difference too. Contribute at patreon.com/right and learn more about your right to reason at therighttoreason.com. Your activism is appreciated.
Dr. Hunsinger, if anybody didn't already hear the episode that you and I were talking about, conspiracy theories, just kind of let them know your background, who you are.
Sure. So I'm currently an associate professor and in the psychology department. And so my training is in social psychology and cognitive science. So I have a master's degree in cognitive science, which is the study of the mind, and then a PhD in experimental social psychology, which is a study of how the social environment basically affects us, the way we think, feel, behave. And so my research tends to focus in on mindfulness, meditation, and then also separately and also sometimes intertwining. I'm looking at how our mind works, specifically focused on how the unconscious mind works and how that can impact us in sometimes very, very subtle ways. And I've been involved, in the field of scholarship in psychology for several years. I've published a bunch of articles in peer-reviewed scientific journals. I've also been on the other side of it in terms of reviewing other people's articles and making, recommendations about publication. So I've been involved in both sides of that process of scholarship. And I guess I do want to also say, just for context for listeners, that I don't have any training beyond high school and college in physics. I don't have any training in surveying or in engineering. So I'm coming at this as a psychologist and as someone who is just trying to understand this debate and sort through all the information that I've come across in listening to people talk about this.
All right. Wow. All right. Very, very impressive. And Tyler, everybody knows you for sure. You're kind of a reoccurring guest that I get asked about you more than any other guest I've had on the show. And I'm talking I've had, debates with crazy Kent Hovind, you know what I mean? I've had speakers like Matt Dillahunty on and Michael Shermer, and whenever I get a random email or a random message on Facebook or Twitter or something, it's typically, hey, tell me more about that Tyler Klatenoff guy. So just in case anybody, maybe this is their first time listening, tell us about yourself and maybe tell us why you're here, because that'll be a great segue into what we're talking about today.
My name's Tyler Klatenoff. And I'm kind of a compulsive autodidact. I just read all the time. I've got a really chill job where I pretty much get paid to read and do whatever I want. And so I just read and read and read. And I found some crazy stuff. And I'm not really ashamed to say what I found. Kind of triggering on all sides because I'm an atheist who doesn't believe in evolution. Outer space is also fiction. And so I'm just kind of triggering everyone. And yeah.
I didn't know you didn't believe in evolution.
Yeah. Sometime it's going to be an aside here, but sometime we should also talk about, from an atheist perspective, non-biblical, why people don't believe in evolution. But that's a completely different thing than this.
Interesting. All right. But so you are a flat earther. And I think Matthew had a couple questions that he wanted to ask you about that. Before he does, would it be all right, Tyler, if you kind of just give Matt maybe just your best evidence? Like I know that there's probably a lot of different ones that might be, equal to one another that you would say, like, these are really great defenses, but just one of the top dogs that you'd say, if you can accept this, that's really going to challenge your belief in a globe planet that we live on.
Really, I came from the whole outer space is fake thing. That's how that the Earth is flat. But mostly I focus on the outer space is fake. But if I were to say just one thing for how we can know as fact that the Earth is flat and not a ball, there's so much. But the main one I would say is the impossible viewing distances we can see. Especially now that we can get infrared filters to cut through the thickness of the atmosphere, we can see things from like 500 miles away that should be so well hidden. Like, refraction is what they often say, but stuff isn't refracting 500 miles up. And there's a lot. It's a whole preponderance of evidence.
So
we can see too far. They're faking outer space.
The ship going over the horizon in the distance, something like that, you would say, whenever you do like an up-close zoom on a lens, that you can still see the ship, for example. Yeah,
because we can see what appears to be a ship going over the curve. But then we can take a really nice binoculars or zoom camera and just zoom right back in and see the bottom of the ship. And then watch it sail, quote unquote, over the curve again. And zoom right back into the bottom of the ship, proving you're not actually seeing it go over a curved ball of water.
So, Matthew, we've got zooming up on things going over the horizon, being able to see stuff in the distance that we shouldn't see. And then also he added in there that space isn't real.
I heard the podcast you did with Robert however many months ago, where I guess the first time you were on and talked about your flat earth beliefs.
Yeah.
And I remember in that podcast you talked about being a truth seeker, that was your kind of main driving motivator. Would you say that's still the case
definitely.
for you? Do you take sensory information to be proof of the earth being flat in terms of not being able to see? Just we remove any equipment, like specialized equipment, and just use our senses, and the fact that we see flatness.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Right. Well, so let me put out an alternative version of that, of what people are saying about our senses. And I talked about this with Robert when I was on the podcast before, because I think it's true that our senses are helpful and our senses are reliable and accurate to a certain degree, or else how would we survive as an organism, right? I mean, there's no way we could survive as an organism at an individual level, and there's no way we would have survived as a species for as long as we have if our senses were constantly leading us astray. But we also know
that they seem pretty spot on with everything else.
Well, I mean, they can be very spot on, but I think one thing to think about, and this is, and I'm not expecting necessarily this to be something that immediately changes your mind. I mean, I encourage you to sit with this information and then maybe like reflect on it. And it sounds like you're a pretty reflective and thoughtful guy. So if we look at all the research on our nervous system and our sensory systems, I would say the main conclusion that comes out of that is kind of a broader meta level conclusion, is that our senses are designed, and I'm using the word design very broadly, whether you want to attribute that design to, a divine being or evolutionary processes or, other processes, whatever you want to talk about as the origin. Our system does seem designed to help us survive. And so what that means is that what we see is not always about what's happening out in the world with 100% accuracy, but what's going to help us, what's going to serve us from a biological point of view. So, for example, and I talked with Robert about this, there's research I've done with a colleague of mine who was one of my first mentors, where we had people sit down in front of a computer and they had to make a dot accelerate and decelerate to keep it on the computer screen. And so basically there were these two horizontal lines that were parallel, and the dot kind of sat in between those two lines. And we just told them, press the left arrow key to accelerate to the left, and then press the right arrow key to decelerate it. And eventually, if you keep doing that, it'll start moving to the right, and just move it back and forth as best as you can. And basically at a certain point, it would disappear and they wouldn't know when and where it would disappear. And what we found was that where they saw it disappear was ahead of where it actually disappeared on the computer screen. And so that distance between the actual and perceived disappearance point, we attributed to basically that our visual system is anticipatory, that our beliefs, our expectations are built into our sensory system, so that it's what we call top-down processing, where our expectations, things that exist in our psyche.
True, then we would be hallucinating a ball, right? Sorry to interrupt, but if that was true, then we would be seeing a ball, because that's what we're told, right?
Well, it's not at that level. I mean, we weren't able to make them hallucinate in the sense that we were not able to make them see things that weren't actually there. But what that showed is that the way they were perceiving the movement of that actual stimulus, that actual little ball on the computer screen, was impacted by their expectations. And so if we translate that to what we experience, we are not necessarily experiencing things as they occur with 100% accuracy in terms of what's actually happening out there in the world. You know, I'm not going to put a percentage on the accuracy. It's probably approaching 100%, but there's room for our system to perceive things in a way that helps us survive. So I wouldn't expect us to see the world exactly as it is with 100% accuracy. So there's that. And another aspect of our sensory systems is that they have to be sensitive enough to pick something up. We don't perceive everything that's happening out there in the world at even an unconscious level. And everything that gets into our system, our nervous system, isn't experienced at a conscious level. So for example, I could show you pictures of like spiders and snakes, etc., things that are threatening. And I could show you them quickly enough that you won't experience them consciously. Like you'll just see a blank computer screen, literally, at a conscious level. But unconsciously, your system's taking that in. Your amygdala, which is an area of the brain involved in kind of detecting threat, is going to be very active because you're detecting that threat, but not at a conscious level. So let's say in terms of the motion of the earth. Well, our sensory system has to be sensitive enough to pick up that motion, right? To detect that motion. But even if we do detect it, it doesn't mean that because we detect it, we experience it at a conscious level. Because is detecting the motion of the earth really helpful at all for survival? And we can say the same thing about curvature. I mean, we live on a huge earth, so we wouldn't expect our sensory system necessarily to be sensitive enough to detect curvature on such a large plane and at such a large scale. And is it really going to be helpful for our survival, for our sensory system to detect that curvature? With how big the earth is, no, it's really not going to help us, serve us at all in terms of our survival from a biological level. Now, none of this is to say that these are not, I'm not presenting this as a proof for a globe Earth that's spinning, but what I'm saying is I would argue that based on all the research we have on the nervous system, that we need to take off the table purely sensory information as proof that the Earth is flat. And I would also say the same thing about just, I hear people who are flat earthers say, well, how is it possible that we all experience ourselves as standing right side up? Right? How could that possibly be the case? Well, again, just because something doesn't align with our common sense doesn't mean it can't be true. There are plenty of experiments I could point you to that show that we are not, as an organism, very, very good at taking in very complex information. And you can do something as simple as the way you frame a question. If you change the probabilities, if you keep the probabilities the same, but you frame the question differently, people will respond differently to that question as if the probabilities are changing. So, we are critical thinkers, but we're also not awesome and spectacular as a species at being critical thinkers. And so I would say that just because we can't detect motion, just because we can't see curvature, just because something doesn't align with our common sense and intuition in terms of what the standard scientific model says, doesn't mean that those things can't be true. So by the way, I do agree that our senses are flawed and I don't trust them fully, but that is something I can't ignore, that all my senses are saying it's flat and motionless. Although if you'll notice, that wasn't even one of the first two things that I listed, the reasons why I don't believe that we live on a ball. Probably wouldn't be my third or fourth one either. It's all about, we can measure that there's no curved earth. Gotcha. Yeah. And granted, I hear what you're saying. It's true. Like, you didn't address that. I guess I wanted to get that out of the way, so to speak, because I hear it again and again, in people in the flat earth community. And I think that it's, I'm not going to fault someone for not having understanding that I do of the way our nervous system works and the way our mind works. Someone who hasn't spent the years that I have, studying and training, et cetera, and doing my own research. but it's a misunderstanding that I find is pretty ubiquitous in the flat Earth community in terms of how our system works. But I hear what you're saying, that it's not just that, it's that aligns with all these other things that you're seeing. So yeah, I definitely would like to address the things that were your top two. Do you have a preference in terms of which one we address first, the zooming in or the seeing things from far
probably
away?
The zooming in would work. Doesn't really matter, but zooming in would be good. That's probably the first one most people think of as they saw a ship, quote unquote, go over the horizon.
I've seen videos, and I imagine maybe you have too, since you seem like since you enjoy getting as much information as you can, which I'm with you. Infophilia, right? Love.
Yeah.
Or an information junkie.
I like to learn everything and believe none of it.
Right.
That's what I like to do.
Right. Well, it can't hurt to, I think, to be skeptical and then to try and to say, okay, I need evidence for this, so let me start from that, that place. I can appreciate that. I've seen videos on YouTube where someone is zoomed in with a very good camera, and yet the ship still, as it moves farther away, it disappears from the bottom up, and eventually, I watch videos where eventually all you can see, and they keep zooming in, and they keep zooming in, and they zoomed in as far as they can, and still they end up being able to see, the very, very top of the ship. I mean, I'm not a sailor, so I don't know what.
Yeah, there is a
terms are.
lensing. I know exactly what the effect you're talking about. And actually, if you look on certain days, you can actually see that lensing where it kind of looks like a half person. If I'm thinking the same thing you're talking about, it looks like a half ship. Like it's kind of cut, and you see it with buildings too. Is that what you're talking about? Or it looks like it's kind of cut like halfway in the middle, like half of it's under the curve?
I've seen those. I guess the one I'm thinking of is where you literally see the ship almost completely disappear, save for a little bit of the top of the ship after a person has zoomed in as much as they can zoom in with that particular camera that person is using. Sure. And, and the thing is, our eyes, right, our optical instruments, a camera, a telescope, they're all optical instruments, and every optical instrument, right, has its limitations, right, that are inherent to the nature of the lens that instrument's using. Our eyes can't see very far, and then you use a camera that can zoom in, you can see farther. Then you use a telescope, you can see even farther, right? But even a telescope has its limitations. So, I don't know what your beliefs are around how wide the flat Earth is, like what the diameter is, or what the longest distance is that you could possibly see a ship, from land. But right at a certain point, even every optical instrument is going to not be able to allow you to see that object. But so it might be hard for us to come to a conclusion or come to agreement, just in terms of that part of it, because I can say, well, you can't see it anymore because it's disappearing over the curve, and you could say, well, you're not seeing it anymore, because of the limitations of the optical instrument that you're using. I would say maybe a better way to figure this out between us is to say, okay, what if we take these two situations? A ship is getting farther and farther away on a flat plane, and a ship is getting farther and farther away on a curved plane. What would we expect to see? And so what's your story around what you'd expect to see? Let's assume we have an optical instrument that can see infinitely far away.
Assuming that we lived on a ball, what I would expect is to see a curved horizon, because a ball wouldn't curve only directly in front of you. We would see a curved horizon, I think, is what we would see. And also, if we lived on a ball, we would see buildings would tilt away from you if you see them in the distance. We're told that the Earth curves, there's 8 inches per mile of exponential curve to this ball. So even after a couple miles, we should start to see a measurable amount of curve, and we should be able to measure that and verify it. But we can't do anything like that.
In terms of the buildings curving away from us, the thing is, when you, for example, if the two of you were standing, let's say a foot apart from each other.
Wait. Matthew, I'm sorry, man. Tyler, are you saying that we should be able to see buildings, not standing straight up, but in the distance they would start to turn away?
Tilt away from us, yeah.
Really? That would be your expectation.
That's what I would expect.
If you look at something really, really far away, that buildings would start to almost move, as if they're falling over or leaning Tower of Pisa or something, but it would be the top of it moving away from you while the bottom stays still, wow. I've never heard.
I don't know that we would actually see that, just because if we think about what, from a distance, what are we capable of seeing? For example, if the two of you were standing a foot apart from each other, and I was standing 1,000 feet away from you, but you were facing me, I wouldn't necessarily be able to tell whether you're standing right next to each other or whether you're standing a foot apart, right?
Well,
and as I got closer, it would be easier for me to know that is the case. So
think about it,
I
Matt.
don't know that we're going to see. I mean, so if we're standing far away from a building, we would know if it's tilting in terms of what we're seeing side to side, but I don't know that I don't think we'd be able to see it tilting away from us. Just like I wouldn't be able to see that you're standing behind Robert or vice versa.
But I think he might be right, hypothetically, if Tyler and I were standing on like a small sphere structure and somehow our feet were like glued to it, like imagine like that small thing had gravity, then it would look like it's like I'm on the side of it and he's 90 degrees. Let's not say 90. We're a little bit close to each other, but I'm kind of farther away. It would look like that. You're the psychologist, but I think where he's thinking is that like the Earth is smaller than it is, maybe. I don't know.
Just like if I were standing 5 feet away from the two of you and you're standing a foot apart, I would easily be able to see that. But you move me 500 feet away. Yeah. There's no way I'm going to be able to know that's the case just with the information I have. So I think there is a scale issue here that, if
we should still see buildings tilting away at least sometimes.
But why? Like what's your
can zoom in and see buildings
that should be the case? I mean, I hear that like that may be what your common sense or intuition.
That's just what I would expect. I can't prove, I guess, that's what we'd expect. But what I would expect just by imagining living on a ball, we would definitely be able to see it, especially when we can see buildings from dozens of miles away and see that there's a completely perfect outline that's not tilted or skewed at all.
How do you know this conclusion you came to through this thought process is accurate? Because you're basing your belief in part about the shape of the Earth on this conclusion you came to through a thought experiment for which you have no evidence. But you're using that to inform this other belief that you feel that you're pretty confident about.
Yeah, and I've got hundreds of reasons to believe it, and that's just one of them. But yeah, you're right, and that's why you can't really just say. I mean, I would love to be like, here's a test that proves zero curve over, 8 miles, that proves the Earth is flat, one thing. It should be that simple, but it's not on either way.
But I mean, are you willing to agree that the idea that buildings should be that we should be able to see them leaning away from us on a curved Earth is based on a thought experiment and complete speculation and not something that you have evidence for?
I think, kind of. But at the same time, I think it's not quite speculation that if you're standing on a ball that things would curve away from you in the distance.
I guess I'm saying it's speculation in that you don't have any evidence for that. It sounds like it's based on like kind of a thought process you went through of saying, okay, if A is the case, then B should be the case. So if we're on a curved surface, then things should appear to be leaning away from us.
Yeah, and I was a philosophy major, so I do have a lot of my reasons to think this are very logical based.
Okay.
And I'll admit to that.
Okay. And, that's philosophy I love philosophy. I'm a big fan of it. And it's certainly, I would say as a scientist, philosophy is a great place to start in terms of generating hypotheses. But then we need to test those hypotheses. And, I hear what you're saying. There might be some hypotheses you can't test, and there might be some that I can't test, right? There's might be some that we can't test because of limited resources or just because of other constraints. Do you mind if we go back to the ship disappearing again?
Sure, whatever.
If we were to step away from our beliefs about the shape of the Earth and we were to say, okay, because the thing is, I can look at a ship disappearing over the horizon and I can say, look, it's disappearing because like that, of course it's doing that because that's what you would expect on a curved, it's doing that because the Earth is curved. And you could respond and say, well, no, it's doing that because of perspective and refraction and, all these other factors. And both of us, if we assume the Earth is the shape we think it is, then we can both use what we observe to argue, for what we see. And that's probably not going to get us anywhere. So if we were to take a step back from our beliefs about the shape of the Earth and say, okay, what would we expect to happen on a curved surface if something is moving away from us? Well, yeah, we would expect it to disappear when it disappears over the curve.
You expect 8 inches of it per mile to disappear.
Well,
wherever you were looking at.
Right, I do want to talk about that, but just stay with me if you're willing, because I do want to get to that. I definitely have some stuff I want to talk about with that. It sounds like you do as well. So I would expect that object to disappear gradually based on the speed at which it's moving away from me, and to disappear in a very systematic way that is from the bottom up. And I expect that to happen regardless of whatever kind of atmospheric conditions are in place. if I were thinking about what would happen on a flat plane, if I think about like a car moving away from me on a road that's really far, well, it's not going to, I mean, you know, if the road is flat and the surface is flat, it's going to get blurrier and blurrier and just disappear at a certain point. And I could zoom in on it with a camera and it would do the same thing again when it got far enough away. So I wouldn't expect it to disappear systematically from the bottom up. So my question to you is...
That's the lensing thing I was talking about. Sorry, what was the question?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you to explain this. So what do you mean by a lensing thing?
The air it's a liquid, essentially, and it works as a lens. No one is denying that. That's true in both models, is that the atmosphere is thick and works like a lens. And what we can see is that even at the end of a football field, even only 100 yards, we can start to see that lensing effect where it looks like there's a person that's being kind of cut in half and the bottom part is hidden. And we can start to see that. And I'll make sure to send a thing to Robert. It's a very simple, in fact, I can maybe even do it now as I'm talking. It's a very simple demonstration of just a dude walking away at the end, walking down a football field. And you can see the bottom half of him disappear first because of the lensing effect of the atmosphere.
Okay. So, but the thing is, the ship doesn't disappear once. It doesn't it's not that half of it disappears and that's it. It systematically disappears from the bottom up. So if the atmospheric conditions are remaining the same over the course of, let's say, half an hour as that ship is slowly disappearing from the bottom up, I don't think that your explanation accounts for maybe not seeing all of the ship, but it doesn't account for the continued disappearance of the ship, because that person gets cut in half, but does he continue to disappear from the bottom up, or does he stay only being able to be viewed? Well,
eventually he kind of just he kind of blinks out into the horizon.
Exactly. He blinks out. He doesn't continue to disappear, from the bottom up. He's partially
abruptly
occluded,
blinks out.
Partially not visible to you. And then he blanks out and then he's gone. And that's not what we see with ships. We don't see half of them disappear, not be visible, and then suddenly the ship is gone. We see that systematically disappear from the bottom up. And so what you're explaining wouldn't account. I don't see how that can account for systematically disappearing from the bottom up until the whole ship is gone. If what you're saying is true, then it would have to half the ship would be gone and then the whole thing would be gone eventually.
Well, the atmosphere changes a lot every day depending on how much heat, how much moisture is in the air. It changes a lot.
Sorry, go ahead.
You can even just watch mirages even, and just a time lapse of mirages, and you can see all the buildings go half buildings, full buildings. They just kind of bubble, and that's pretty much all you're seeing.
Okay, so in that case, number one, that the videos that I've seen on YouTube, the atmospheric conditions would have to be changing quickly enough within that short period of time for that to happen. And also, what I'm hearing you talk about is something that's very stochastic, not very systematic. And it's if it's jumping back and forth between half there, fully there, not there. I mean, again, that's not what we see with ships disappearing over the horizon. They are systematically decreasing in visibility. They're not jumping back and forth at all. The ones that I've seen. You can actually
find ships that disappear pretty much any possible way. It just changes so much. I mean, if you're going to cherry pick and find it, you can find all sorts of ways that the way the ship appears to sink into the horizon.
It seems like you guys are making a fairly similar argument, where obviously I would agree with Dr. Hunsinger on the shape of the Earth. You're kind of both saying that it's like you're being visually deceived and you can't necessarily trust your senses. Like Tyler, you're saying, well, you can't trust your senses because you can see a guy on a football field start to disappear at a certain distance, and that's just the atmosphere. And then Matthew, he's kind of saying you can't really trust your senses because maybe certain things seem a certain way, but we didn't really evolve to be able to use our senses for anything other than survival. I'm going crazy. Wanted to ask Tyler.
Yeah, I think we should get off this one because we could just go back and forth, and this is one of hundreds of proofs. I think we're getting too hung up on one thing.
Perhaps. But one part you said that you're a philosophy guy, you're a thinker guy, and Matthew accused you of maybe being a little speculative rather than evidence-based. You know what I mean? And you were saying, yeah, but a lot of the stuff that I come to because I do respect my own thinking process. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but you're saying I do have this right to think for myself, to be critical, to be a skeptical person, and I totally, as we're all atheists here. Is that right, Matt? We're all atheists.
I wouldn't put myself in atheist camp, but I'm not a theist.
Okay, fair enough. So we're all skeptics. So this is something that we all have in common, and I'm kind of wanting to figure out, and this is just a curiosity thing, and I hate to sidewind the convo, but Tyler, how should I say it? What proportion of your belief in flat Earth, and I know you said, you research everything, learn about everything, but believe nothing, but you do believe the Earth is flat. So what proportion of this belief would you say is based on your philosophical view of how things should be, and what portion of it is based on?
Almost none of it. None of it. It's all about, we can measure that there's no curve to Earth. We can see things that should be well impossible. It has really nothing to do with me or my mind. It's about what we can measure and observe and verify with the external world.
Well, can I just push back on that for a second?
Yeah.
When Robert asked you for one of the reasons why you believe the Earth is flat, you did provide a reason that is based on like an internal thought process. And I hear what you're saying, that there are other reasons that are not based on that, but based on observations that we can make. But I guess I just want to recognize that that it sounds like it's a mix for you. To say that it's only things you believe based on observations doesn't sound like it's true, based on what you said before about buildings leaning away from us.
I mean, there's many things. I'm not going to just ignore certain evidence because it's not tangible metrics. It's just something to note, I guess.
I know we're moving on. Can I say one last thing about the ship disappearing, and then we don't have to get into a big discussion? Is that okay, Robert?
Yeah, that sounds great.
If a flat earther wants to make, and I'm saying this in general, wants to make a compelling case for why a ship disappearing systematically from the bottom up, how that can still be in line with the flat Earth model, then I would say that they need to invoke mechanisms or conditions that can explain that behavior across all observations of ships disappearing over the horizon. And I'm just not hearing that.
How about what I'll do also is I'll try to link some more proof and some ways that effect of disappearing how you think you see it being reproduced, like on a football field. Would that be good to help you see that that's obviously not the curve of the Earth if you can see it in just a football field? Yeah,
like anything that you want. I'm happy to look at anything you want to send through, Robert. I'm like you. I mean, I'm an information junkie, so I will consider any piece of information and, let it affect me if I feel like it's solid information, if it's something that I should be assimilating into my belief system.
So and another thing I want to ask you about is, have you looked into all the space hoax stuff, like when they're being caught on wires and using green screens on the ISS? Have you looked into that kind of stuff yet?
I have. I mean, I've watched videos on both sides, like videos of people in the flat Earth community critiquing those videos and pointing out what they think is evidence of CGI and or like movie screen production. And I've also watched the critiques of those videos by people in the globe Earth community. So yes, I have, and I'd love to talk about that with you.
That's a huge one for why I don't believe in the globe anymore.
Okay. I'd love to talk about that. Can we, I know you said you'd want to talk about see things from long distances. Do you want to jump into that?
Oh, yeah, we can go into that too. That's a good one.
So do you mind if I start since you gave that as one of the main reasons?
Yeah, so the world record zoom is 275 miles. We can see the bottom of mountains 275 miles away. How do
we explain that? I hear a lot of people in the flat Earth community citing that 8 inches per mile squared. And like you said, that exponential drop that we should see. And I've seen several videos in which flat earthers say, well, here's the Chicago skyline, for example. Forget the location they're looking at from. It's on the other side of a body of water.
Toronto to Chicago.
Is it? Okay. So, let's look at
maybe
Chicago,
Ontario,
Toronto, and they say, well, look, I'm going to go on Google Maps, Google Earth, and I'm going to measure the distance, use that to tell me what the distance is between these two spots. And then I'm going to use that 8 inches per mile squared calculation to say how much of the building should be occluded. And I find that I can see much more of the building than I should be able to see given the amount of curvature. And there's a big problem with that calculation because that's actually not the correct formula to use. That formula, what that formula tells you is if you as the viewer were to create an imaginary line that goes straight out horizontally, that distance you're getting is the distance from the imaginary line down to the surface of the Earth. So that tells you that distance, but that's not the same thing as the amount of curvature.
Just out of curiosity, you know that we use the official Earth curve calculator, which accounts for refraction and all that. Anyways, when we say how much should be hidden, we use your official calculator for all that. So that really shouldn't be an issue, in my opinion.
Well, but the thing is, when you use the correct formula, which is much more complex than 8 inches per mile squared, you get exactly what you see.
It's just a ball.
You get the amount of
Shouldn't be that
inclusion.
complex.
What?
Well, it's just a ball. It's just a standard Pythagorean theorem for just what happens. How much should a ball with a circumference of 25,000 miles be? And it works out. Just simple number crunching works out to about 8 inches per mile.
That's just not true.
That's the official number.
It's just not true that that simple math equation. That's the official
number, though.
Well, that's an official number, but not the official number that you'd use to figure out how much occlusion is occurring. That equation is used in, for example, and it's used when you have very short distances. It can be used for those purposes. Like, I know sometimes surveyors, my understanding is that surveyors will sometimes use that, but they're surveying over very short distances, and they're not having to deal with the curve because they're dealing with such short distances. So they're kind of bypassing, if they were surveying over large distances, then yes, they would, but they're doing it over shorter distances. So that it's not that equation it's not that it's not true or it isn't correct or it's not meaningful, but the information that you get from that is not meaningful in letting you figure out how much of a building should be occluded. So if you use that equation to say the Earth can't be curved because you should see less of this building, then it's a straw man argument because you're not using the right math to figure out. So you're not going to come to the correct conclusion.
I think you're kind of doing the straw man by ignoring my question of why can we see the bottom of a mountain 275 miles away? That's
I'd have to know, I'd have to have all the information and I'd have to put it into the formula, the correct formula to say, okay, what is the viewer's height relative to
where is this a correct formula, if not the official Earth curve calculator?
Well, I don't have the correct formula memorized. I know if you go to the website is metabunk.org.
Yeah, that's the official calculator I've been talking about. That's the one we use for everything.
But that's not using the 8 inches per mile squared.
Yeah, if you plug in the 8 inches per mile and just like plot some points, it almost lines up exactly to that 8 inches per mile.
Well, it might line up closely, but it doesn't mean it's using that formula. I mean, over short distances, the right formula and that formula will probably give you the same result. But over longer distances, they're going to start to diverge more and more. So I don't know what the formula is off the top of my head, but I've seen it. I've seen it. I just, and it's much more complex, 8 inches per mile squared. So how you could see the base of a mountain from 200 miles away. I wouldn't be able to tell you that unless I had all the information and we could sit down together and plug all that information into the right equation, because you need to know where the viewer is in relative to the base of that mountain. I mean, if the viewer is much higher above sea level than the base of the mountain.
No, it's coast to coast. There's this one time, people come from all over the world to see this thing because the sun sets right behind this mountain. So you get to see like a silhouette of the mountain. I can't think of the name, but I'll definitely send a link to Robert. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting. And yeah, you can see standing on the coast, like 270 miles away or something like that. You can see the bottom of the mountain with your feet in the water.
Well, have you ever taken this question to someone who is a surveyor or someone who's an engineer or physicist, like someone who has studied this a lot more than the two of us have? Yeah. And maybe more systematically and maybe under mentorship?
Yeah, it seems to me, from what I've seen, there's pretty much a consensus among surveyors that they don't account for curves. And there's this guy named Mark Sargent. He's not one of my favorites, but that's one of his like big shticks is getting surveyors on, talking about how there's no curvature in anything they do.
That's like the main flat Earth guy, right? That Mark Sargent guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's pretty corporate.
Does he also believe there's no space?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much universal among flat earthers.
Oh, okay. I thought you were like far in flat Earth guy because you didn't believe in space. I figured maybe they thought space existed outside of the dome, or something like that.
They're lying about everything.
Okay, explain that one. Yeah.
So a vacuum can't be connected to a non-vacuum, and that's why they have to fake everything. And the best way you can tell that they're faking everything is the bloopers. They do stuff like they drop bolts. Often those are my favorite ones, the ones where they make mistakes and then the astronauts look all embarrassed. So like you would have to believe that the astronauts on the ISS have like special gravity technology that they only use to fake like they're dropping bolts and troll flat earthers or something. Like, how do you explain those bloopers?
Like they got videos where they let go of something and it falls straight down?
Yeah, and they look all embarrassed. I'll send you something right now.
Can I ask you a question, Tyler?
Yeah.
What's your starting point for believing that everything you're seeing from space is faked?
It's just obvious stuff.
Well, say more about the obvious. Like, what do you mean by what makes you say it's obvious?
Like, he'll be doing a backflip and then he'll fall mid backflip. That's pretty obviously not in
Like
space.
he falls down?
Yeah, all the time, dude. They mess it up all the time. I can send you a whole hour of compilation of times where they faked it.
If Matthew sent you a whole hour of video from NASA proving it, that wouldn't be convincing to you, though, right? Like, I mean, just in the information age that we're in, it's like these video things. Like, I know they're cool, and I see a synonym to me right now, and that's awesome.
You can prove that they can do it well sometimes, but you couldn't disprove them dropping bolts and stuff. There's nothing you could show me to prove that all of those videos of stuff like them dropping bolts is fake. I mean, there's a lot of it. There's dozens and dozens, maybe even hundreds of examples of them being busted, being on wires with green screens, dropping bolts, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, like, what's your evidence that they're using green screens and using wires? Like, are you...
You can see it getting caught on there. You can see it getting caught on there close. And then, especially the most telling evidence is when they seem to know that they messed up, when they look embarrassed. One of my favorite ones is Tim Peake. He does this backflip, and he just falls, like, right in the middle of it. And he just looks so embarrassed. He's got this, like, just this super nervous, like, little kid, hand in the cookie jar, smile, like, tee-hee-hee.
When you say drop, do you mean, like, he is mid-flip and he literally drops straight down, like, if I drop the pen on my desk right now?
Yes. That's exactly
that kind of falling.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's say we give you this deception. Like, let's say NASA is faking videos and photographs in space. How does that prove that the Earth is flat?
That wouldn't necessarily prove the Earth is flat, and that's why I kind of keep the fake outer space and flat Earth thing separate. But it does show the level of deception. If we live in a world where they are actually literally faking outer space even existing, in a world where Star Wars and Star Trek are just propaganda, flat Earth seems not that crazy.
But just because they're creating fake videos, it doesn't mean outer space can't exist. Like, the conclusion from, like, saying, okay, if we give you the premise of NASA's faking videos of being in outer space, the natural conclusion is not outer space doesn't exist. It's just the natural conclusion is they're not in space, or they say where they are. Like, outer space could exist, and it could mean that they're just not there, but they're trying to pretend that they're there. And they're saying, okay, what would it look like to be in outer space if we were actually there? Well, this is what it looked like. Oh, shoot, we keep messing up in creating a believable video that we're actually in outer space, but that doesn't mean that outer space can't exist. So how are you going from they're faking being in outer space to outer space doesn't exist? Like, I don't see the connection.
Outer space is impossible because a vacuum can't be connected to a non-vacuum.
What do you mean by that?
So we're told that
I want to hear that one.
Our atmosphere is a atmosphere, and that space is a vacuum, and that at some undisclosed altitude it gets less and less and less, and then suddenly it goes from atmosphere to vacuum gradually, and it's somehow connected, a vacuum and a non-vacuum next to each other, and that's impossible. That's never been observed, that's never been repeated, and so the official story is impossible of outer space. So
is it possible that oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so between the story that we're being told being impossible and them having to fake it on the ISS, pretty much, because if you had a real space station, you wouldn't need to fake any of it.
True, but I mean, I hear what you're saying. You're saying that because you believe outer space isn't possible and they're trying to fake being in an impossible place, then that just, for you, kind of reinforces the idea that it doesn't exist. But, I can't do as good of a job of making a case for the existence of space as like a physicist can. But, I mean, is it possible that maybe neither of us have an understanding that would allow us to adequately understand how the Earth's atmosphere can exist next to space? And I've heard physicists say the space is not an actual vacuum, and that the reason why the atmosphere exists as it does next to space is because of gravity. As you get farther up in the atmosphere, it becomes thinner because gravity is not able to hold those molecules in the atmosphere as well, and we're leaking, like our atmosphere is leaking into space, and that's
I'm aware of the story.
So you know the story. So is it possible that, I mean, you say it doesn't make sense to you, the story, but do you really have the training that would allow you to say that? I mean, I don't feel like I have the training that allows me to give you a...
Yeah, I think I do have the training to say that if someone says something impossible happened and can't prove it, that, I can just know that's not true.
Well, what training gives you the ability to say it's impossible?
Yeah.
Well, logically, it's just impossible. And if someone showed me an example of a vacuum sitting next to a vacuum and a non-vacuum being connected but not by a solid barrier, then I'd be like, wow, I guess I was wrong. That doesn't make any sense, but I guess outer space is at least possible, but they can't even do that.
But your argument rests on the assumption or the necessity that someone has to be able to replicate that on a scale that you can see, and maybe that's not possible. I mean, the Earth is huge, the atmosphere is huge, space is huge. So maybe it's not, maybe we can't replicate that kind of phenomenon at the scale at which we live. And so just because we can't replicate it in a way that you can see it doesn't mean it can't exist or it's impossible. And I go back to my other point in the beginning about common sense and intuition. Just because something doesn't align with common sense doesn't mean that it can't be true or it's impossible. The reality never guaranteed us that we would be able to understand it completely. And given that our system is geared for survival, we shouldn't expect to be able to understand the complexities and nuances of reality completely or have everything align with our common sense or intuition. So I think that there's assumption that you're making that's problematic.
Yeah, they're just lying about everything, man. Did you know that they put even, and like I'm kind of getting off topic, and you're right.
Well, yeah, I want to push back and like I want you to respond to what I said.
Yeah,
I'd like you to respond to what I said about the assumption you're making versus
I agree. I can't prove. I mean, technically you can't prove that, Superman isn't my lover or something like that. I mean, I guess, yeah, technically I can't, like, I don't know what kind of training I would need to know that vacuums can't connect to non-vacuums, or what would make me quote unquote qualified to feel certain that vacuum can't be connected to a non-vacuum.
Well, I think Matt's saying that it's not a vacuum and a non-vacuum aren't connected because of the atmosphere. In the same way, like you could have an autoclave, like that has a vacuum atmosphere on the inside, and it's not connected to us that are in the room that the autoclave is in, but it has a wall between it and it has a barrier. And correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but I think Matt's trying to say that is what the atmosphere does. It just doesn't do it in a small scale in the way that maybe you're suggesting. Would that be a fair summary of it?
Yeah, that, and the atmosphere is gradual. It's not vacuum. It's not space next to atmosphere. It's a very thin atmosphere next to space where there's probably a blurry line. I mean, the place at which scientists say, well, this is space and this is the Earth atmosphere is probably kind of arbitrary, because it's there's probably like a thinning of the atmosphere such that at a certain point they had to say, well, this is space, when there's absolutely
the
no
difference between
molecules.
Like night and day or something like that.
Right,
We're just calling it a certain time, but that's not like the light and the darkness necessarily stop, and start.
Right. I mean, like the middle of the day and the middle of the night are very different and easily distinguished, but twilight and dawn, not so much.
Would that make some good sense to you, Tyler? Or would you say,
yeah, I mean, you guys are just really saying, I mean, I know the official story. You're pretty much just saying, like, I'm challenging the official story, and then you just say the official story again. Like, yes, I know that there's some experts who have it all figured out, and I'm not an expert, so I'm just some idiot. I don't know anything. Yeah, I know the official story.
I mean, I have no more expertise than you do in this, Tyler. Like, I'm doing what you're doing. Like, I'm going online. I'm reading. I'm listening to people talk about this who know way more than I do. And we may not be able to replicate this space atmosphere situation on Earth, but we can do, I mean, I've heard people talk about kind of experiments that we can do that give us a little slice of that, like understanding how gravity works, understanding how air molecules work, understanding, what happens when we create a vacuum, and how all these things interact. And maybe
it can't actually be proven, though. Will you at least admit that we can't actually prove a vacuum can be connected to a non-vacuum?
Well, I don't feel qualified enough to be able to say I know that we can't prove that. I just know that I've never seen a globe earther say, well, here's an experiment that replicates what we see with our atmosphere next to space. I've never seen that, so maybe that can't be done. But, maybe there are ways in which scientists can create a situation in which there's a small vacuum next to air molecules. I don't know. I mean, yes, it might be like what you're saying might be true, but I don't know that. I don't know enough to know.
What do you mean by we? You mean like the three of us? No, we can't. But whenever you say
like
we like humanity, yeah, they
humanity in general.
Yeah, but if you're going to use we as far as like humanity, then you have to start going and trusting more than just the three of us talking. As soon as you think of we as a joint group effort, well, we have NASA for that, buddy. We are doing this together.
NASA's a bunch of crooks.
We're going to the moon. We're going to space. We're dropping robots on Mars,
no,
man.
We're not, dude.
That's we.
Stealing the money.
When you found out there was no God, I feel like that hit you like a ton of bricks. And
yeah, I was raised theistic, very much.
Yeah, and it hit. I remember hyperventilating in my garage because I started reading the Bible with a critical perspective, right? I started really studying and thinking like, well, how could God be good and still flood the earth? And the common apologist arguments for it just weren't holding up, because they would use one argument in one way and another argument in another time. And I was like, this is a bunch of bullshit. And I started getting angry at the arguments, and that made me even more skeptical, right? Made me even more of a critical thinker, because I'm like, I'm seeing your bullshit for what it is. And
just try applying that to outer space, man. It'll go away quick.
And that's kind of where I wanted to ask you about, is because I remember holding my chest, like when it finally hit me, man, because I went from Christianity to Taoism, because I thought, like, I got to at least believe in something that has like this kind of like this elusive kind of just goodness to the world kind of thing. And if you concentrate hard enough, you can reach a certain level of Brahma or whatever. And everybody that's Taoist or Buddhist is listening to me right now, and they're just like, Robert, you don't get it. But anyway, but then I felt like that kind of fell short for me too, because I would meditate, and not that I don't appreciate benefits of meditation. Easy, Dr. Hunsinger. I know you're going to jump in and be like, mindfulness, Robert, actually, isn't it? But no, I'm just saying it failed me again. And I was breathing hard. My heart was pumping. I had to lean on something, and it hit me. And afterwards, I was infuriated. I was pissed, and I started getting angry. My own government. I started getting angry at my country. I started getting angry at the banking system. I started getting angry at who's controlling what. Follow the money, and just everything just fell apart. Because what did I have as a foundation anymore? And I feel like at that moment, if somebody would have come up to me and said, "Dude, NASA ain't even telling you the truth," I would have been a little bit vulnerable to that. And that doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. I'm not bringing up this topic to say you're wrong, because this in no way challenges the flat earth theory. What I'm saying, I'm just saying, like, instead of me saying,
but you are vulnerable. We all got swindled by religion.
Yes.
And what's to me? Yes.
Would you say that maybe?
So we are vulnerable. We obviously do believe untrue things, we are told, and we should maybe look at everything all over again. If we're going to be believing in religion, maybe outer space is fake, just like heaven and hell.
Do you think they hurt you and you said, I'm not going to get hurt again?
I mean, a little bit, but yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess.
Well, can I jump in? Just ask another question? Because that's something that you just said that I think also it sounds like it's related to something that you said in that first podcast you're on with Robert. You said, but I remember you talking about being hyper vigilant about being deceived and not wanting anyone to feed you incorrect information.
Yeah.
I mean, because the thing is, everything that's part of the standard scientific model, in terms of all these things that we observe and outer space existing, I mean, all these things we have explanations for in terms of what we know about the way the universe works, the way the world works. And so we have this incredible model that's elegant.
Yeah, but is the model real, though, is the thing?
Okay, well, So the thing is, a model only has utility if it can predict what we observe. And this model that we have predicts very well everything that we observe. And the flat Earth model does a relatively poor job of predicting what we
I disagree
observe.
with that. I think they just took the flat model and pretty much just wrapped it around the ball, and they're pretty much interchangeable.
Well, the thing is, though, if a model doesn't work well, then it's going to not be in line with
the flat model does work well.
What if the Flat Earth Committee is feeding you incorrect information? What if because you believe that people are deceptive and people are out to hurt you or get you or take advantage of you or manipulate you for their own means? Is it possible that's creating a lens through which you're viewing the videos from NASA, the photos taken by NASA in other countries and SpaceX, et cetera, and that's coloring how you're seeing those things?
Yeah, I'm colored everything, though. I've got that lens of they're maybe lying. They're probably lying. You better be careful. I'm seeing that now with NASA and with the flat earthers showing me stuff. And from my own research, yeah,
that must be hard to live in a world that feels so dangerous in that way. I would have a tough time.
No, you
not
get
being
used
able
to
to
it.
trust anyone.
I'd rather just live like that than have a bunch of wrong stuff in my head.
So how do you know? How do you know the flat Earth stuff isn't the wrong stuff?
It could be. That's why I don't talk about flat Earth so much. We don't really know how big the Earth is. Maybe it's just really big. Who knows? What I do know, though, is that outer space is fake. That's kind of like my base is outer space being fake. I'm kind of refiguring out the whole world from there.
I mean, do you feel like we have to live on a flat Earth if space doesn't exist, or we could still live on a global Earth?
No, there's no curve to Earth.
Why do you say?
I guess it could be really big, but no. I'm thinking that no, there's just no ball. You can't live on a ball, I think. You can maybe live on top of a ball, but I don't really believe in gravity anymore either. And there's just so many false assumptions with everything. It's kind of a big package deal that I just kind of stepped away from all of it.
So I guess one thing I'm struck by is it sounds like between the last podcast and this one that I hear you talking more about stuff we don't know than stuff we do know. And some of the stuff that you say we do know either can be explained by the standard scientific model, or doesn't conform to a flat earth model. And so I'm wondering why you're not taking, I was really struck by this the last time you were on the podcast, why you're not taking more of an agnostic approach. Because the things that you talked about that convince you that the earth is flat, I was able to explain from using the globe earth model in terms of using psychology and then the standard scientific model.
You explained like 3 of hundreds of pieces, but yeah.
Okay, so the other 97 pieces can be explained with the standard model between psychology and the standard scientific model. Well, if everything could be explained, even if it doesn't make sense to you, because like I said, just because it doesn't make sense to an individual doesn't mean it can't be true. Wouldn't you have to be agnostic then? If you're going to take the position that, NASA is deceptive and institutions tend to be out to get us and to manipulate us. And I can't, I'm not buying the standard scientific model. But then why would you buy the flat earth model anymore? Because what if the people feeding you information about that because I'm assuming that you're not going out and doing a bunch of experiments yourself. I'm not either, to prove, that what the shape of the earth is.
Yeah,
so we're both
look at them all.
on.
I mean, that's why, yeah, you do. Yeah, like it's a double-edged sword. And yeah, you do have to just be questioning of everything. And yeah, you just have to assume.
But why not remain agnostic? Like why, if you're getting all of your information from other people about the shape of the earth, why are you taking positions on the shape of the earth versus saying, you know what? Most people say it's a sphere, but I don't know that I believe that. Other people say it's flat, but I have to stay agnostic.
It's provably flat.
But
it's provably flat. We can take measurements, especially with laser tests. We can see that there's no curve over 3 miles, no curve over 7 miles, no curve over 20 miles. That's
maybe there's not as much curve as you would expect, but maybe you're using, or the people that maybe the people feeding you the information are giving you the wrong information, not intentionally. I mean, they could be deceiving you unintentionally. How do you know that they have the training and the expertise to use that equipment properly and to take into account all the factors they would need to? They could be deceiving you, and they could be deceiving themselves. And we're both in that position, right? I mean, the people feeding me information about the globe Earth, they could be fooling me, either intentionally or unintentionally. So I guess based on what I've heard you say, it seems to me like the most reasonable position for you, based on what you've told me, is that you would have to be agnostic. And I don't see how you could state beliefs with such confidence given the other things that you've told me, because it seems like you're selectively believing the people who are feeding you information that suggests the earth is not a sphere and that NASA is lying, and you're doing something different with the information that people are giving you that suggests that
there's just such a preponderance. And I agree. And it is kind of like somewhat hypocritical, I guess. But at the same time, it's all just about the preponderance of evidence. And that's why I don't usually bring up the whole flat earth thing and stick to the fake outer space thing. Because, you do really need to start getting into like the nitty gritty, like proof number 98, proof number 99, and just see how many different ways you can prove it. There's just nothing like that for the ball. And there's hundreds of proofs for a flat earth.
Well, but I think one of the problems with that is that you're eliminating all evidence from space based on the idea that
based on that I can prove they're faking it all. Yeah.
I mean, you're saying space can't exist, right? And maybe that's true, but maybe it's not. I mean, how do you really have the ability to say that for sure that space can exist? And you're saying, well, NASA is deceptive, but even if you have evidence that NASA is being deceptive, how do you have evidence that that other countries are being deceptive, that SpaceX is being deceptive as well?
I can prove all that, man. All the missions are fake, dude. They're so lazy with it, too. Once you get into this, it's just mind-blowing. They're not even really trying to be sneaky. And what I think what it is that there's people, like not everyone is in on it, so there are whistleblowers, like kind of behind the scenes putting in Easter eggs. That's kind of why I think they're so lazy with it.
I guess, I'd have to see. I mean, I'm assuming I've seen some of the same videos you have with like SpaceX. But, when I hear flat earthers say something like, let's say, maybe you feel more comfortable being in the space deception camp than the flat earth camp. But, when I hear people talking about NASA, let's say NASA being deceptive, that you're going to need to come up something better than that to say, well, it's clearly CGI. So, I mean, you talked a little bit
But I mean,
about...
sometimes you can just say that. Like Toy Story, would you agree that that's clearly CGI? You can just look at that and be like, yep, this is CGI. This isn't real magic toys.
Yes, I think I can clearly say... I feel comfortable saying that for
He's
a
got you
computer
there,
animated
Matt.
movie.
The Toy Story. Is Toy Story real toys?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, right. And that's kind of where the flat Earth is
I know. I'm
they
not
show
laughing.
us a cartoon
Yeah.
ball, and it's just obviously self-evident by looking at it that it's obviously not real.
If you don't mind kind of wrapping this up for us, if each of you wanted to make a closing statement, and then we could let the listener decide thereafter.
This was a really interesting discussion. Tyler, thank you for, being willing to have this discussion with me. And I appreciate your skepticism, and I appreciate your ability and willingness to, challenge beliefs that, that we grow up, being given. Because like Robert said, I am definitely in the globe Earth camp. I am a gravity enthusiast. I'm open to the possibility of NASA having faked the moon landing, but what I've seen hasn't yet convinced me, but I'm open to any information. But I just overall, I find the globe Earth story much more convincing, and I don't feel like I have good reason to be distrustful of so many people in the world coordinating such a large effort to deceive me. But I understand that not everyone has the same set of experiences in their life that I do that would lead them to that point. So yeah, thanks Robert for having us on. Thanks Tyler for joining me.
Yeah, so the flat Earth thing, it's about space being fake, and it's about the measurements, because yes, that is a really good reminder that our senses can lie to us. There's a lot going on that our senses are trying to put into our brain, but that's why we can look through measurements and see that there is no measurable curve. So I would encourage you all to give this a second look, despite what you've heard, because the Earth is pretty obviously flat, in my opinion, and space is definitely fake. I can prove that.
Guys, thanks so much for talking to us today. I really enjoyed it. Thank you to Tyler and Matthew. Thank you to Dave Blair at davefreesong.com/free music. Thank you to our patrons. You too can support us at patreon.com/right and learn more at therighttoreason.com. Next week, I'll be talking to Eric Hernandez. The bio from his website describes him as a dynamic young evangelicalistic and apologetically inclined teacher who has a passion for defending his faith on theological and philosophical grounds. He's a licensed minister, a certified formation therapist, and a former instructor at MacDeal Bible Institute. He is well respected and sought after for his expository ability and insight into apologetics. That's next week. Between now and then, remember that you have the right to reason.
Going down.
I have the right to reason.
57 there, like I said, didn't care, but I forgot to leave a note, and it's so hard to stay afloat or soaking wet without a boat, and I knew I should have taken off my shoes.
A reoccurring guest that... What was that?
Oh, sorry, I took a sip of water.
It sounded super loud. But anyway,
But even just one of them, like the viewing distances,
Hold on.
you can see stuff.
hold on 1 second, Tyler. I'm sorry, man. Who's typing?
Oh, that's me. Do you want me to?
Can
I could like mute myself while.
I don't want no more going down.
First two, I wouldn't be my third. It just so happens that our senses are also.
Hold on 1 second, Tyler. Your audio's a little shaky on your end, and usually these things come in waves. I know mine does that sometimes, and if I just wait for it, it comes back. So anyway,
no worries, but okay, you'll notice that with the things that I mentioned, why
hold on, man.
the Earth is flat.
You just started like right while I was still talking, but
Oh, sorry, because I don't want to lose your thought. Sorry.
Okay. So yeah, the last thing he said is, "Hey, what's your response to that?"
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
And
sounds
I gotta say, Matt, Tyler changed my mind. So
All right, well, maybe I'll see you two at a Flat Earth conference then,
Yeah.
or at least a
Yeah.
fake space conference.
I'll definitely be trying to go.
all right, you guys have a good one.
Cool. Thank you too.
Taking her advice, I only want to go.
Support the right to reason at patreon.com/right.